For years, we believed we were watching a family built on faith, trust, and shared sacrifice. But what if everything we were shown was only half the story? What if behind the smiles and speeches about unity, there was a secret financial shift happening right in front of our eyes? A move so quiet, so calculated that no one noticed until it was too late. This is not a story about love falling apart. This is a story about control, silence, and an alleged betrayal hidden in plain sight. Stay with us, because once you hear what was uncovered, you will never watch this family the same way again. For more than a decade, the world watched a family grow, expand, struggle, and succeed, all in front of the cameras. Viewers were invited into living rooms, kitchens, family meetings, and emotional confessions, and were told this was a story about faith, unity, sacrifice, and above all, honesty. One family, one vision, one shared life. A system built on trust, where every adult contributed, every child benefited, and no one was supposed to be left behind. That belief was repeated so often it became unquestionable, not just to the audience, but to the family itself. It was the foundation of everything they did, the reason they endured jealousy, instability, and constant compromise, because they believed the reward was collective security. Yet, what happens when the belief itself becomes the blindfold? What happens when trust replaces verification and loyalty silences questions? This story begins not with anger or confrontation, but with faith, pure, unguarded faith, the belief that no one inside the family would ever act against the whole. In those early years, money was scarce, but effort was shared. They lived modestly, worked multiple jobs, and stretched every dollar. The idea of a family pot was not symbolic, it was literal. Income from each wife went into one shared pool, and expenses came out as needed. That structure allowed them to survive, and when television fame arrived, it scaled up, but the principle remained, or so everyone believed. The show brought opportunity, stability, and a growing income stream that was meant to benefit all households. It paid for moves, homes, education, and daily life. And for years, no one questioned it because the system appeared to function. Disagreements existed, but no one doubted ownership of the money. It belonged to the family as a whole. That was the promise, and that promise carried them into a major turning point. The move to Flagstaff presented as destiny, as spiritual alignment, as the next chapter in a shared dream. But with that move came financial pressure on a scale they had never experienced. Higher costs, multiple mortgages, undeveloped land, and ongoing obligations from the past. The stress was immediate and intense, and the explanation was always the same. Money was tight, sacrifices were necessary, patience was required, and the family accepted it because struggle was familiar. But something about this struggle felt different. It lingered longer, it demanded more, and offered less reassurance. Months turned into years, and progress stalled. Questions were deflected, and frustration grew. But still, the core belief held that whatever was happening, it was happening to all of them equally. That belief kept them compliant, it kept them quiet, and it kept them trusting, even as individual households began to experience drastically different realities. Some downsized, others delayed medical care, others lived with constant uncertainty, while one household appeared insulated, untouched by the scarcity that defined everyone else. The contrast was subtle at first, easy to rationalize, until the math no longer worked. Because the show was still airing, the contracts were still active, and the audience was still growing, yet the explanation remained unchanged. There was no money left. And that is where the story begins to tighten. Because when income exists but access does not, the problem is not shortage, it is control. And control, when hidden behind trust, can go unnoticed for years. The alleged shift did not happen loudly. It did not come with announcements or meetings. It happened quietly, through paperwork, through decisions framed as technical or temporary, through structures few people understood and fewer questioned. According to sources familiar with the timeline, a separate company was formed during this period, a private entity with limited membership and a name that reflected only part of the family at the time. It meant nothing to most because it was never discussed, never explained, and never disclosed as a replacement for the shared system. But its existence would later become central to everything, because if income once directed to the family began flowing elsewhere, then the entire narrative of struggle collapses, and the years of sacrifice take on a darker meaning, especially when viewed alongside moments of acute need, moments when money should have been available but allegedly was not. Medical expenses, housing instability, and long-term planning were all impacted by what the family believed was a lack of resources. But belief does not change reality, and reality has a way of surfacing eventually, sometimes through conflict, sometimes through accident, and sometimes through a single detail that cannot be explained away. And that detail, according to those close to the situation, came unexpectedly, not through investigation, but through coincidence. A name, a document, a question asked casually and dismissed too quickly. Because once the possibility entered the conversation that money was being handled differently, the past began to look different. Conversations replayed themselves. Explanations lost credibility, and patterns emerged where there had once been noise. The idea that financial strain might not have been universal, but selective, reframed every decision, every argument, and every sacrifice. And as the possibility grew, the need for answers became urgent, because this was no longer about lifestyle differences, it was about accountability and fairness, and whether the system they had trusted had been quietly replaced without consent. The emotional weight of that realization cannot be overstated, because it meant that hardship endured might not have been necessary, that loyalty may have been exploited, and that the very structure they believed protected them may have been used to exclude them. And once that door opened, it could not be closed, because numbers do not respond to emotion. They either align or they do not. And when those numbers were examined, when timelines were reconstructed, and when expected income was compared against lived reality, the discrepancy became impossible to ignore. The story no longer relied on feelings, it relied on math. And math pointed to a gap that demanded explanation. And that explanation would not come voluntarily, because admitting it would unravel everything. So silence continued, denial persisted, and tension escalated behind the scenes, until trust was replaced by resolve, and belief gave way to determination to understand what had happened and why, and who benefited. Because this story is not about one decision, it is about a system allegedly altered without consensus, a structure built quietly and maintained through misinformation. And the longer it remained hidden, the greater its impact became on lives, futures, and relationships. And that is where part 1 ends, not with answers, but with a question that changes everything. If the family was never truly broke, then where did the money go, and who decided who deserved it? As the questions grew louder, the silence around the finances became heavier, and what once felt like confusion began to feel intentional, because answers were no longer just missing, they were being actively avoided, and that avoidance carried consequences. The family meetings that once promised clarity now produced only frustration. Conversations ended abruptly, emotions ran high, and every request for transparency was met with defensiveness or dismissal. And this shift marked the moment when trust finally fractured. Because trust can survive hardship, but it cannot survive deception, especially when that deception affects children's futures and basic security. According to sources close to the situation, once the possibility of redirected income was acknowledged, the atmosphere within the family changed completely. Private conversations replaced open discussions, and comparisons began between what each household was experiencing and what they were being told was normal. The disparities were no longer theoretical. They were lived and felt in daily choices, in what could and could not be afforded, in the constant message that resources were exhausted while evidence suggested otherwise. And this contradiction pushed the situation beyond emotional conflict into something structural, something that required more than conversation to resolve, because explanations without proof only deepened suspicion, and so the focus shifted from asking questions to seeking verification, from emotional appeals to factual reconstruction. And this is where the story enters its most intense phase, because once numbers are involved, once records are requested and timelines assembled, the truth becomes less flexible and far more dangerous for anyone who has benefited from obscurity. Sources allege that attempts to gain clarity were met with resistance, that information was compartmentalized, and that financial control was centralized under the justification of leadership and responsibility. Yet leadership without accountability quickly becomes dominance, and when that dominance is challenged, it often responds with anger rather than explanation. And that response, according to those present, only confirmed what had already become clear, that something was being protected, and it was not the family unity that had once been preached as the ultimate goal. Tensions escalated quietly, first through strained interactions, then through emotional distance, and eventually through irreversible decisions, as one by one relationships dissolved, not solely because of emotional neglect, but because financial trust had evaporated. And without that foundation, partnership was impossible. And when separation became reality, it forced a reckoning, because disentangling lives requires disentangling finances, and that process does not allow secrets to remain hidden. Documents must be produced, assets identified, and contributions acknowledged. And it was during this process, according to multiple accounts, that the full scope of the financial divergence began to emerge, not as rumor, not as theory, but as pattern. Income that once supported many now supported few, control that was once shared now consolidated, and narratives that once emphasized collective struggle now exposed selective relief. And as these realizations surfaced, the emotional response was profound. Not rage, not vengeance, but grief. Grief for years lost, for sacrifices made under false pretenses, and for children who grew up believing limitation was inevitable when opportunity may have existed. And that grief transformed into resolve, because understanding alone does not restore equity, and acknowledgement alone does not secure futures. Action was required, not to punish, but to correct. And that action took form through legal structure, because the only language capable of addressing systemic imbalance is accountability. And while legal proceedings are often framed as hostile, they can also serve as instruments of clarity, separating emotion from obligation and intent from impact. And according to those familiar with the process, that was the goal: to establish what had existed, what had changed, and what responsibility accompanied those changes. And the framing was deliberate. This was not presented as a family dispute, but as a business arrangement that had allegedly been altered without consent, because the family itself functioned as an enterprise. The show generated revenue, the brand relied on multiple contributors, and the expectation of shared benefit was foundational. And when that expectation was allegedly violated, it constituted more than hurt feelings. It represented breach of duty, and the evidence assembled reportedly reflected this approach. Documented statements, public representations, contractual assumptions, and financial analysis were combined to tell a story not of chaos, but of design, not of accident, but of intention. And as that story took shape, the emotional weight increased, because every number corresponded to a lived experience, every discrepancy reflected a missed opportunity, and every explanation offered in hindsight contrasted sharply with what had been said in the moment. And the question of why became unavoidable. Why centralize control? Why obscure access? And why maintain a narrative of scarcity if resources existed? And while motives are difficult to prove, impact is not. And the impact, according to sources, what began as a story about unity ends as a lesson about truth, trust, and accountability. Once the silence was broken, everything changed. Not just relationships, but futures. This story is not about choosing sides. It is about understanding the cost of secrecy and the power of speaking up. And as the dust settles, one question remains: how many times do we believe the story we are told without ever seeing where the truth really leads? What unfolded after the first initial reports was undeniable. Decisions delayed, care compromised, and futures narrowed based on information that may not have been accurate. And when those affected began to speak, their accounts reportedly aligned, not through coordination, but through consistency. The same explanations, the same denials, the same justifications repeated across years and relationships. And that consistency gave credibility to claims that this was not miscommunication, but method. And as the situation moved forward, the emotional toll intensified, because confronting a truth like this requires confronting the person you trusted most and accepting that loyalty may have been used against you. That realization does not arrive gently. It arrives slowly, painfully, and completely reshaping how the past is understood. Moments once viewed as hardship now appear as manipulation. Moments once excused as stress now resemble control. And that reframing is devastating because it forces a re-evaluation not just of finances, but of identity, of belief, and of the story told to the world and to oneself. And yet, within that devastation, there was also empowerment, because once the truth was faced, the future could be rebuilt differently, with safeguards, transparency, and shared authority. And according to those involved, that became the priority: not revenge, not exposure, but protection, ensuring that what had happened could not happen again, and that the next generation would not inherit the consequences of silence. And that shift marks the true turning point of the story, because it transforms loss into purpose and pain into structure. And while the fallout continues, the significance lies not only in what was uncovered, but in what was created in response. Systems that do not rely solely on trust, but on accountability, frameworks that honor contribution, and leadership models that require transparency. Because families, like businesses, thrive on fairness, not on control. And as this chapter closes, the lingering question remains: not just what happened, but how many times it went unnoticed, and how many stories like this exist behind carefully curated images. And that question ensures viewers stay engaged because it extends beyond one family, one show, and one moment. It challenges assumptions about power, trust, and shared success, and invites reflection on what unity truly requires. And that is where part 2 ends, not with closure, but with consequence. Because once the truth is known, there is no return to ignorance, only the responsibility to act differently moving forward.